My name's Amy Zimmer. I'll be your host today. We've got salmon surveys in the Pudding River Watershed from the Pudding River Watershed Council. We're pleased to have Executive Director Kurt Berning from the Pudding River Watershed Council join us today as he discusses results from salmon spawning surveys within the Pudding River Watershed. Just a little bit about Kurt. Kurt grew up in Mount Angel and worked in finance and accounting prior to joining the Pudding River Watershed Council as the executive director. His vision for the Pudding River Watershed Council includes growth to 5+ staff members and managing an exciting portfolio of projects within the watershed.
I have kind of like an overview of our Watershed Council section 1, and then I have kind of a section 2, like an overview of the surveys, and then I have a couple of specific case studies we'll walk through. So I'll pause for questions after each. All right, we'll get going. So very basic, a watershed is like a ginormous bathtub. So anything that's, any water that falls inside that bathtub ring and ends up here at this point where the pudding dumps into the Molalla is part of the Pudding River Watershed. You can see, which is kind of cool. Can you see my cursor as I'm moving it?
You
Okay.
can.
You can kind of see the pudding didn't actually used to dump directly into the Molalla. You can see an old course here. So, rivers change over time. So the pudding has sometimes been a direct trib of the Willamette, and sometimes it's gone into the Molalla. And I wonder if sometimes the Molalla has gone to the pudding first. Anyway, lots of things to consider and think about there. But so everything within that, you can see here. So our major tributaries are, of course, the pudding. On the west side, you have Mill Creek, the Little Pudding, and then on the east side, you have our, Cascade tributaries, Rock Creek, Butte, Abiqua, Silver, and Drift. And those are all the ones that were inventoried in this snorkel survey study. And just so you have the towns, you know where we're at, it's part of Salem and Kaiser, so kind of the eastern edges of both those towns. And then all of Aurora, Hubbard, Woodburn, Jervis, Mount Angel, Silverton, Scotts Mills, and then Molalla, most like 80% of Molalla. So it's funny, of course, it's, as you know, in Marion County, Silverton is our like southern east, or, like there's no towns as you get up in the Cascade. So all the towns are kind of clustered in the west side of the watershed. And Oregon has this big watershed council model. So you can see around us are Yamhill watershed, Molalla, Clackamas River. Below us is North Santiam. And then there's a lot of small watersheds around Salem, like Rick Riall and Pringle Creek and Glen Gibson and all kinds of smaller ones. So keep going. Watershed councils are odd because we exist because of state mandate, but most of us are also independent nonprofits. But we all follow the same vision, which is to engage in voluntary restoration collaboratively with the community, focus on native fish habitat, and of course, watershed functions, water quality, stream flows, that kind of thing. And every watershed council is pretty different, and we have changed a lot over the years, but we've been around for about 30 years, but our most recent iteration was incorporated in 2015. And we have 9 board members, about 4 people on staff. There's all 4 of us, but other than me, everyone's part-time at the moment. So we're about 2.5 FTE. But our previous high was 1. So we're in really good shape right now. And it's been kind of an exciting time of growth for us. Yeah, and then in terms of what a watershed council does, I think this is pretty unique, but you'll probably see these themes throughout the state. But we, of course, number 1 is stream fish, riparian habitat. I could tell you 20 projects we're working on in that. Number 2 is kind of like we're trying to have a community-facing side too. So we have all these community nature hubs we've been working on. The point is because some of our restoration work is behind a lock gate and it's hard to get to up in the hills somewhere. So we're trying to have examples of good functioning ecological habitat in every city in the watershed or every town. So there's some examples we're working on. And then, of course, we kind of tried to be in other high-value conservation projects as assigned group. So we're working on a white oak project right now. We had just applied for a big emerald ash borer grant. We helped recover some properties, replant properties from the 2020 fires. So we do stretch outside of 1 and 2 when needed and when it seems like high value. Okay, that's my last organizational intro slide. So I'm just going to stop share for a second.
I kind of have one actually.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always great to get a reminder of a watershed and what the Pudding River Watershed is and does. So I found it interesting still, even though I've seen this before. Um, so one thing you mentioned a community nature hub, and you kind of went into how that is, it looks like you have some projects listed, but what does that mean to be a hub for a community?
Well, it's a term I've made up, so it means what I want it to. I just think it's we're trying to find a green space with a lot of natural forest features that's near a creek.
Hmm.
Now, if we can only get two or three, then that's good. So like, Aurora, our green space is right next to the architectural salvage. We have some Marion SWC grants funding our work there. And it's right along Mill Creek, and it's this big community kind of nature area. So kind of in every community, we're trying to say, is there a place close to a creek where people could see functioning, thriving native plants and go on a walk and see birds and see fish and that kind of thing. So yes, like kind of I guess you could almost call it like a nature park.
Hmm.
That's our hope. And in every town, there's usually one of these already, or there is one, but it's very degraded. So that's kind of Aurora and Silverton have we're working on improving those areas.
Hmm. I love that. I think hub is a lot more intriguing than just park.
Yeah. Well, it's hard. I mean, I think that's one you all probably know this or maybe not, but someone was asking me for public access to the pudding so they could do plant surveys and where to go. And I was like, oh, there's no public access on the entire pudding. There is a little at Malala River State Park, but there's no actual access to the Pudding River portion. Like you would have to bushwhack or trespass or something. So it is a watershed that doesn't have a ton of just like nature outside of Silver Falls State Park,
Yeah.
publicly accessible, high functioning natural spaces. You don't know what to restore, what to work on unless you take data and record data. So this is every 10 years or so, we try to do a giant assessment of salmonids in the watershed. There's this, you know, protocol developed called a rapid bioassessment, which is essentially you look at every fifth pool and you count all of the juvenile salmon that you find in that pool, and it gives you a really accurate baseline of what the population is. So that's what we'll be talking about. Um, and so, yeah, and additionally, you're not just thinking about what fish you find, but where are they? And then what are the limiting factors? Like what's keeping us from having more fish? So that we're using this to target restoration actions and make them the most effective. And then specifically, what fish are we looking for? You can see these cute little guys. We're looking for a juvenile Chinook, coho, cutthroat trout, and steelhead trout. Now, historically, we wouldn't have coho in this basin, or at least, yeah, because the coho traditionally aren't thought to have been able to pass Willamette Falls. It would be only steelhead and Chinook. But since now there's a fish ladder at Willamette Falls, we have a lot of coho as well, which I think is good. I think any salmon is good, but you could get people saying, "Oh, I really want more steelhead," which would be great. But we're in a tough situation with salmonid health at the moment across the state. So I think any thriving salmon populations, I'm happy about. And then yeah, we try to do this once a decade or so. So we last did it in 2014. So I'll be talking a lot about our comparison between these numbers and 2014 numbers. We also did a big one in 2006. And then we don't look where there's no salmon. So those, like I was saying, the Little Pudding and Mill Creek and even the main stem pudding, they just get too hot in the summer for juvenile survival. So really, we're looking at Cascade tributaries that stay cooler and have more cold water inputs. So from north to south, we looked at Rock Creek, Butte Creek, Abiqua Creek, Silver Creek, and then Drift Creeks on the bottom. So you can kind of see those blue lines are all the survey points. And I'll be talking specifically in my case studies about Abiqua and Silver because they're kind of a good and a terrible result. So, and we'll talk about why each. Um, of course, just in terms of historic runs of Chinook and Steelhead in the Willamette Basin, there were a lot of adults returning of both species to Willamette Basin. Obviously, not all of those are coming to the Pudding River, But with, 500,000 adult fish is estimated in the 1800s, early 1900s, so a ton. And those numbers are a tiny fraction of what they used to be. But we do have some encouraging numbers. You see 200 Springs Chinook and Abiqua Creek in the 40s, and then coho coming on in the 1920s. So that's just to give you a bit of a historical benchmark. And yeah, dang, the text here is very small, but kind of what has impacted fish population since then. The answer is pretty much everything you can think of. It's not like a one problem, or one factor problem. So we have on here urban development, lowland ag, livestock grazing, upland industrial forestry, splash damming, stream clearing that the state did, road construction, water withdrawal, surface mining for gravel, dam construction, and then beaver eradication. You could do a whole presentation on just one of these factors and analyzing how it's affected, uh, you know, wetlands and streams and fish populations. But just to know, this is a very complex issue. So whenever people talk about declines of salmon, it's always so multifaceted. It can be hard. And so I think in our particular area, when we look stream by stream, we have sometimes a really good idea of what happened on one stream. But telling a overall story can get kind of confusing because of how many confounding variables there are. In our watershed specifically, and this is, I think, maybe the most interesting thing they found, is that summer temperatures are the main limiting factor for juvenile salmonid survival. So, and specifically, in the last 10 years, temperatures have changed a lot, and even in that 10 years in our watershed. So, lower reaches of Abiqua and Drift and Butte that were spawning salmon and rearing salmon in 2014 were too hot in 2023 to do the same. So we're seeing such a rapid warming of these streams, and of course we'll be tracking this over time, and it's not only in our watershed. But you think of all those 100-degree days we've been having in the summer and the heat dome and that kind of thing. Of course, those are also warming streams. And then, especially if the colder water is mostly coming from the foothills and the headwaters of that stream, by the time it gets lower and lower and lower, you have more water withdrawals. That water's getting hotter and hotter. So we just saw quite a reduction in salmonid survival in the lower reaches. And I'll talk about that in Silver Creek because that's an especially stark example. Not that you need to memorize this graph, but just to let you know, of course, you can see there's zones at which salmon thrive and there's zones at which they cannot live. And you kind of see the 17 degrees, and then below that is optimal growth. So anything above 17 is getting difficult. You go up to 21 degrees Celsius and it says growth response depends on food availability. So things get challenging. Above 21, you see is behavioral adjustment, no growth. So that, they cannot develop, even though they're not dying, they cannot develop. And then, anything that's sustained above 22 or 23 or 23 or 24, then you're seeing mortality for the length of exposure. So it's really, of course, it's very important. And it depends a little bit on species, and that's part of why coho are thriving in our areas. They seem to be the most resilient to fluctuating temperatures, whereas Chinook seem to be the least resilient, which is why they've been struggling. So I'm just going to do two case studies for you. I think that kind of illustrate what's going on in our watershed, both highs and lows. So we're going to talk about Abiqua Creek on the really positive side and Silver Creek on the negative side. And here's Jeremy, the owner of Biosurveys, down in a creek looking in a pool below a log jam. So there's probably fish down there. So just that's what he's walking the stream. Every fifth pool, he's putting his head in, counting, and some of the pools he'll write like 317 coho, and I'm like, how did you count? He must have some method of summer, yeah, but I don't know how you get to 317 without. I'm not that good of a counter, I guess. So in terms of Abiqua Creek, it was a pretty surprising positive result in terms of juvenile coho. And I guess one thing to say before I dive into the numbers too much is in every creek, what Jeremy wrote is these creeks are far below their capacity. Their seeding capacity is what it's called, far below. We see way too many empty pools. There should be way more fish. So seeing increases is certainly possible because there's all kinds of habitat out there that's not being used. Um, but it was really exciting to see these numbers in Abiqua Creek. So if you think about coho, they're on a 3-year cycle. So when we looked in 2014 and we looked in 2023, we captured the same 3-year group because they, were in the watershed, then they left for 3 years and came back, spawned, and then these are the juveniles of that spawning group. So the numbers in Abiqua Creek alone were up 4x. So 10,000 juvenile coho in 2014, almost 40,000 in 2023. And steelhead and cutthroat were up slightly. Really great news. I think anytime numbers are going up of fish, it's awesome. And I think that's a pretty easy to explain because Abiqua has the most consistent cold water inputs. So it has a lot of streams, Echo Creek, Little Abiqua, that come in at 12, 14 degrees Celsius. So they're like great cold water refuges for salmon in the summer. And then just to put this in perspective, so just in Abiqua Creek, you can find 2% of all the coho rearing above Willamette Falls. And so that percentage has doubled, yeah, by about 3 times in the 9 years with no hatchery. So it's a totally wild run. So again, it's really encouraging. And so we are taking this as a sign. And part of what we're going to do is try to focus a ton of our work on restoring and improving habitat in Abiqua Creek. And you might ask, well, it's going so well. Why would you focus there? Why upgrade there? And I would say one of their mottos, and this comes from state also grant funding, and what they recommend is you always start with the best habitat where the fish are because it's proven. And then especially if there's all this extra capacity, you can really, 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 really increase populations quickly by increasing the habitat quality. So for example, even on Abiqua with these cold water inputs, you have an extreme lack of large wood, and large wood both helps cool water and creates a lot of salmon habitat. Like big log jams is kind of what I'm talking about. I'll show some pictures later. And even at these cold water inputs, like where Echo Creek comes into Abiqua and where the Little Abiqua comes in, even though there's this cold water input, it's just wide open. There's not a lot of log presence at these critical stream junctions. And so those are things where predators will come and say, oh, wow, all the salmon are hiding here and they have no protection. Yum, 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 and like, so the habitat could just be a lot better given that you have such strong fundamentals in terms of temperature. Silver Creek is a much bleaker picture. Some would say as bleak as it gets, unfortunately, and I'll explain why. And then I'll try to end on a happy note. Let's see. Oh, Oh, there we go. Okay. Went a little bit too far. So just to say the bad stuff first, Silver Creek exhibited the lowest fish numbers observed in all the Pudding Basin in 2023. No coho, steelhead, chinook, or 0+ trout were documented. It's a significant decrease when all 3 species were documented, and there were some cutthroat trout found, but none of the others. So just look at that decrease, pretty straightforward. It didn't have huge numbers before. You could see the coho is only 1,500 juvenile coho. It's a tiny amount. Trout, 25 steelhead, 15 juvenile chinook, probably just 1 red. Super small numbers to begin with, but now they didn't find any. Jeremy was like, it's just empty pool, empty pool, empty pool, empty pool. So tough to see, and I'll explain why this has happened. This will also give you a bit of background to some of that difference. So of course you saw the picture I showed first, but the first issue is just habitat quality. What you're seeing here, imagine a salmon looking at this and they're like, all right, where are the spawning gravels? It's really hard to lay eggs in bedrock because you can't put them anywhere and the water's not going to flow through to oxygenate well. And so You just like there's a lot of stretches of Silver Creek that look like this that are just scoured down to bedrock with no gravel deposits. And part of that, a big part of that that the surveyor recommended or that the surveyor was talking about on Silver Creek is there is a pretty significant history of splash dam logging. And so just to talk about what splash damming is, and I always try to be empathetic to the past because I do think the people that designed splash dam logging solved a very difficult problem, which is how do we get the logs down to the mill? Well, they figured it out. And they didn't, it just was hard because, of course, there's some drawbacks to how they did it. But what happened is, you built these enormous dams on a creek, and then you fell trees behind the dam. So you would build up a big holding pool of logs behind the splash dam. And then when you were ready to run your logs down to the mill, you would blow up the dam. And you can just imagine this enormous scour that comes down the creek. I think yeah, just this enormous like slog slurry coming down, wiping out, taking gravel with it and wiping out other log jams and just kind of creating creeks that are chutes. And then in addition to this, the state for a while thought that creeks should be like highways. There shouldn't be anything in the way. So the state was also going in and clearing out log jams to make sure salmon could go as fast as possible. What we've realized in like modern fish science, I guess, is that what you want actually is a messy looking creek. And I'll give you a good example here. This is like perfect spawning and rearing habitat for a couple reasons. One, every time water hits an obstacle and is forced down, usually it's re-entering the ground and it's cooling because that ground temperature is cooler in the water. It's called like hyperbaric flow, I think. Additionally, you're creating shade and you're creating refuge from predators. So this is like we would see this and be like, oh, the creek's really messy, It'd be hard to have this in a downtown of a city. It'd be probably not the right fit. But when you see this up in the foothills, oh, perfect. Like that's great habitat for fish. And the logs also create deep scour pools. The fish can rear in there. So unfortunately, there's just not a there's basically none of this habitat on the lower reaches of Silver Creek. Um, Second issue, so first issue is habitat quality. Second issue is temperature. So as I'll just read, as the surveyors approached the reservoir dam at river mile 6.5, they noted turbidity, algal blooms, and the temperature was in that 20 to 24 degree range, and it increased. By the time they got to the dam spill, it was 26 degrees Celsius. So if you remember that other diagram, we're in the danger zone, and that was not. There's just a lot of hot water coming off the reservoir, and you could probably understand why pretty easily. I mean, a reservoir is a giant solar panel, and so if that water's spilling off the top, then that's the hot water on top that's spilling over that's then heating the creek below. So it just is part of, what reservoirs are. And yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's a big reason why there was no survival of salmonids right below the reservoir. And the last issue, as you could probably imagine, it's a 70-foot tall reservoir. And it was built in the 60s, I think. And so I wonder, do I have a picture here? No, I don't have a picture. Shoot. Basically, it's a 70-foot tall fish ladder that is completely impassable and at most very optimistic. So you just don't see fish above it because they can't pass. And here you can see in 2014 all the fish that were right before it, like, oh, we can get up there, and then they just couldn't, so they made their red right below. So, yeah, really challenging situation, and especially for a creek like Silver Creek that has cold water and forested headwaters, like the state parks up there. It is a good opportunity for salmon and some cold water refugia, but it's, when fish can't get up there, then they can't get to the spot that they need. So in terms of next steps, I mean, I think this is a question I've been asking myself. Well, how big of a deal is this? Well, it's hard to say given that we're now at 0 salmon in Silver Creek. So you can't, like we have hit rock bottom. It means there's not an urgency of, oh, they might all, get killed if we don't do anything. Well, they're not there right now. So it's sad, but you know, we're at rock bottom. And additional features, the reason the reservoir was built was to be a backup water supply for the city of Silverton. And as a knock-on effect, it's become this huge, you know, recreational access thing. So it's very important to the city, and it's very important to the community. So yeah, maybe you could retrofit the spillway to spill cold water. Maybe you could change the fish ladder to make fish passage possible. All those are super expensive projects. So there's no quick fixes. I don't think it's something that we see as a giant priority right now. Although the one confounding factor is that the city, because DEQ has now listed the reservoir as like a source of heat. It didn't have anything to do with our findings. It was just something that DEQ was looking into. And so the city, along with other cities' own reservoirs, a couple of them were listed in a new state plan saying, like, you have to look into this. You have to see what's going on and see if there's anything you could do to change operations. So maybe there'll be some operational improvements. And I know we are very tight with the city of Silverton. I think the elected leaders there and staff are amazing. So I know they care about this. It's just so hard when you have an important piece of infrastructure um, that it, you know, has a lot of positive side effects as well as negative for fish. Just lastly, let's see if this will play. I think this is cool to see. Oh yeah, okay. We'll just watch it. Well, I'll pause for a sec. This is just an example of how messy creeks are good. So let's just zoom out and you kind of see he's come upon this big log jam off to the right side of the creek, and he's taken his underwater camera and he's going down to see what there is. Oh, there we go. I love watching this video. It makes me very hopeful. So there's the fish. They're down. They're trying to be in the cold water. They're taking refuge under, you know, logs. It's protection from predators. Yeah, so it's exciting. Seeing this makes me think, oh, you know, we just got to get a lot more wood in the stream, and that'll do a lot. And yeah, now that the state's not taking out log jams anymore, I think it puts us in a really good spot. So I'll just open it up for yeah, last questions before we wrap up or discussion. Um, yeah, and just so everyone, you know, I've presented this to the city of Silverton, and so we're not breaking any news here that would be concerning to folks. I think people know about these findings and are trying to incorporate it in long-term planning, I think I would say.
But it helps to have findings like this when you do want to, for example, apply for funding for projects, you kind of have the stats to back it up, right?
Yeah, of course, you know. And actually, speaking of a grant that we'll be applying for to Marion SWCD, you know, like one of the big recommendations of this was make a restoration action plan, like take all these findings and actually get your 1 through 10 list of what we need to work on and what's the highest priority. And it's easy to say, but that's a lot of work. It's hard to do that work. And it's also a lot of landowner work because if your number one priority is owned by somebody that doesn't want to talk to you, then maybe it's not your number one priority. So that's kind of our big app that we're going to put in for partner grants is like our restoration action plan. Okay, great. We had all these findings, but let's like actually build out these projects so they're shovel ready and we can actually do the implementation. So yeah, we're excited about that. To pitch ourselves, to put a little plug in for our grant application.
When you say that, Kurt, do you mind, what would you say, just a sneak peek into that insight? Like what would the immediate on the ground actions be? Is that going to be just putting in wood, or like what, in addition to adding structural complexity in the streams, what would the other steps be to that process?
Obviously, one is temperature. So we need to understand where are the hot stream inputs and where are the cold stream inputs and make sure we have all those fixed and maybe have a story, a rough story about why. Like when they're surveying Butte Creek, which is just right north of Abiqua, you see in the notes, hot stream coming in 25 degrees Celsius. And you think, okay, well, we're in the upper part of the watershed. Why is there a stream coming in at 25 Celsius? That's like a salmon killer. So, you know, there's all these like threads to follow up on to understand, okay, temperature, like what are the highs and lows here? And then are there any actions we could take to, is there on the Cola stream in Abiqua, is that something a land trust would buy the forests that stream runs through to make sure it's not logged so that it stays cold? That could be one action, but it probably wouldn't be us. It could just be someone else caring about the conservation value. Or the hottest stream, would we find a big reservoir on that stream and say, oh, same thing's happening that happened on Silver Creek. It's just or yeah, like understanding what the cause is there temperature wise. Yes, I think that what you're saying about large wood is a huge part of it. Like basically at all anchor sites he identified. So anchor site, I don't think I've talked about this yet, but it's a term he used to describe a place where a juvenile salmoniid could live out their entire life cycle before migrating out to the ocean. So usually it's a place with flat floodplain terraces. So in high flows, they can like seek refuge out in the floodplain and not get blown out by a really difficult stream. It also has cold water. And then a lot of times those anchor sites are lacking large wood. So like one of his top recommendation is put large wood in all of the anchor sites. Okay, again, but how accessible are they for large wood installation? Who owns them? Like there's yeah, you could put, yeah, there's a lot of questions before actually you start dropping wood in the stream. Are they near a bridge? Well, you probably don't want to build a giant log jam upstream from a bridge and then it washes in the bridge and you get in big trouble, you know. And then I'm trying to think like, oh, and then I think the last is passage related barriers. So like on each creek, there is a large passage barrier. And I think making more progress on what the plan is for that and how those are looked at and evaluated, and making sure everyone's talking about kind of future steps, especially on the Abiqua intake. Like the city of Silverton just put aside a bunch of money to evaluate the structural integrity of the dam, have an engineer look at it because they're trying to decide, oh, if its lifespan's only another 10, 20 years, well, maybe it's time to just replace it with something different. Versus if it's going to last another 100 years, let's just upgrade the fish ladder and leave the dam as it is. So there's a lot of, I think passage is a very complex one, but that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, I feel like it's just from my own past experience, I feel like it's really easy to say, oh, well, if we do X, Y, and Z, but there's so many dollar signs associated with what those X, Y, and Z's are. Like you mentioned, whether that's um upgrades to infrastructure or, even the cost of getting logs and woody debris from
Right.
point A to point B, the logistics involved with that, the man hours, I think like you
Right.
point up in this conversation, it's a very complex topic.
Yeah, and I think like one thing that's happening in the state right now, which I think is a great conversation, is what is the easiest, cheapest way to get logs in the stream? So a lot of times, like on Weyerhaeuser property, they need to do some sort of donation or they need to do some sort of habitat project anyway. So when they're doing a timber harvest, they just leave a big pile near the creek and then a conservation group comes in and puts them in the creek, or like there's like I was talking to this engineer who designs logjam projects and he said for standard ones, we just charge $10,000 to design it, and it shouldn't cost more than that for the whole project because we've done it so many times that it's just like rinse and repeat. So it's kind of like it really depends on the creek. Like on the other end of the spectrum, there's people using helicopters to fly in wood to creeks that is like super, super, super expensive. So, and I've also, and on the lowest possible end, someone was telling me about like when they are running, I think it's called yarding logs, when they're running logs over a creek, they could just drop it in as they're going and release a couple, and then it's like immediately just in process there.
Well, we do have a question in the chat for you. The question is, are you checking for other native fish?
Yeah, good question, James. I mean, they're not counting, but there are notes there's notes of, oh, we saw Pacific lamprey here, or oh, there was beaver activity here, we saw beaver. Um, So no, outside of those four species, we're not keeping tabs, but they do record kind of narratively what species were present. And of course, in all these creeks, they found a bunch of non-native fish as well, like warm water fish, because it's the right habitat now for those fish, or it's getting warm as it gets warmer. But yeah, did you have any fish in particular, James, you were thinking about, or just in general?
Do the non-native, like warm water fish you mentioned, do those threaten the salmon? I mean, besides just like competition for resources?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of predation
Ah,
and competition for resources. And that's part of the reason, like, every time you move up or down a stream, you expose yourself to predation, whether it's fish, aquatic predation, or bird, avian predation. So that's why these anchor sites are important, because like if the fish can just stay there from the time they're in the red to the time they're ready to go out to sea, well, then that really like reduces the predation risk, especially if there's, yeah. So, but yeah, that's a big issue. Of course, and you're moving up and down the stream, there's passage issues in the summer and there's all kinds of things that happen. But
I was curious when you were talking about Abiqua Creek and went over the results from 2014 as compared to those most recent. Um, was there anything in particular occurring in 2014 from that study that you can attribute those lower numbers to, or is there anything currently occurring that you can attribute the increase in population to?
I think that, well, what's interesting is that the coho run in each year, 2014 and 2023, was not that different. It's about the same. So the increase in Abiqua wasn't just like, oh, well, the larger coho run was 4 times as big, so it's just a proportional increase. Like, there's like nothing to see here. It's the same. So I think the question then becomes, okay, given that the coho population was about the same, why are so many more going to Abiqua? Or why did so few go in 2014? I guess I don't know the 2014 answer. And my assumption this time is just that as other streams are getting hotter, but Abiqua is still cooler. Like the salmon are kind of, they have these, I don't know the science very well, but they're sensing upstream temperature as they swim. So they're kind of like, yes, they're trying to return to their native stream of birth oftentimes, but they're also trying to find that cold water. So if the Abiqua is just sending that beacon out of cold water, cold water, cold water, and more fish are turning up the Abiqua when they sense it, then it could be as simple as that, would be my guess. Because there hasn't been like we did one large wood installation project that Chelsea's seen on the Abiqua, which is great. But you don't just do one project and see a 4 times increase and in those pools near that project, there's a lot more fish. Awesome. But it's not, doesn't account for the full number. So yeah, like, but I think it's just they're seeking the cold water, is my sense. And yeah, I'll stop there.
That actually makes complete sense, though. Like you say, if the other creeks around it are getting warmer, then as you say, if Abiqua is a beacon of cold water, then why not go there if you're a
Right,
fish? That
right.
makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, and then James, you were asking about bass and crayfish. I would have to look. I mean, I think they found both species, but I don't think the bass around here is native mostly, but I guess there's bass could mean a lot of things. But yes, I think that the populations of bass, I'm pretty sure, are very high, but I don't think they're native fish. But I'm also a little outside of my wheelhouse there. Well, I really appreciate you all having me, not to close us, but if we are closing, it's nice. It's a good topic to talk about, and I think that we want to. I think in the past, when we are just founded as an organization about 2014 when those last results came out. And so the next steps kind of got a little lost in the weeds, and we did one project in 10 years, this big, large wood project. But over the next 10 years, we're hoping that we take these results and do like 5 to 10 projects and really, really see follow some of the recommendations. And so that's why we're trying to think, okay, well, we have the data. What's the next step to get us to more projects that can then, so we're excited to kind of keep the momentum going on this.
yeah, and it's so interesting to see the multi-year, the long-term efforts that it requires to kind of resolve and restore some of these areas that have just been damaged historically. Like some of those pictures you showed of the splash damming are like shocking. And so thinking about how long some of those negative practices happened, it's going to take a long time to get back to any kind of stream conditions that were there before all of that damage was done.
Yeah, something I was talking about the other day with a friend, and I'm totally speculating. So if this is wrong and people know better, but I'm like every ecological change has a benefit or and a cost, and I think like we've stopped doing a lot of the bad practices of just let's go in and tear out the log jams and have the state pay for it. Oh no, we did that for so many years, and now the state's paying to put them back in, you know. But I think one thing that could be it's going to be a pro and a con is we have emerald ash borers sweeping in to a lot of these areas, and a ton of ash trees are going to die, almost all of our ash. Well, on the negative side, stream temperatures are probably going to rise because shade is going to go down, at least in the short term in a lot of these areas. But on the positive side, you're going to have a ton of dead wood that falls in the creek maybe about the same time, and you might have like log jams that then are left. And, you know, I don't know. Like, I think a big reason is that we just don't have enough large wood and large conifers that are recruiting. They call it recruiting falling into the streams because they were all logged out, and it takes time to grow those big trees. In time, those trees will grow, they'll fall. We're about to have a ton of ash fall into creeks, and there could be some benefit from that, even though it's going to be a bad too. And I don't know. So it's just hard to say that, yeah, it's hard to say, but you're completely right. It's like it takes so long to get a creek back to where it was. And in terms of Silver Creek, when all that sediment is stay in the gravel is stuck in the reservoir, well, then it's never going to come back until there's no reservoir blocking the sediment transfer. So it's kind of like it's a multiple, we kind of like layer our errors upon errors. Sure, we did a splash dam and that cleared all the gravel out. Oh shoot, now we also have this reservoir that's preventing the gravel from coming back. Well, it's never, you know, so it's like, but the reservoir is doing a lot of good things too. Anyway, it's just a complex, it gets very complex when you think about how these systems might improve over time. It's, yeah.
Well, Kurt, this has been a very informative, very interesting conversation, and I highly appreciate you joining us today and sharing your experience in the Pudding River Watershed Council's efforts in, quantifying what's happening out there, and also seeing what can be done to improve it, regardless of how short or long term that is. So from a conservation perspective, we appreciate your work, and we appreciate you sharing that and answering our questions along the way.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's a joy. I think you guys are so great at, first of all, I'll probably have to buy some things from the plant sale. So thanks for putting that on every year. And then, yeah, I love you guys, we've always thought, well, what is our need to put together an outreach program? And I think the need is basically zero because the SWCD does such a good job with outreach and convening stuff like this. So yeah, we really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate you saying that. And yes, we look forward to working with you and continuing this and the partner grant. And absolutely a nice plug for the plant sale. That'll be coming up on our website. December 1st, sales will start. Like we mentioned, large and small scale projects alike, plants for as low as $2. Hard to beat. Christmas is right around the corner, so no better gift than conservation for Christmas, right? We really appreciate you being here. It's a pleasure to meet you myself, so thank you.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well.
Bye.